What does marriage do in life? Marriage is a very old human form. It's been around for quite a while, people getting married to each other. One of the things it does is that it legitimizes a certain type of sexual relationship. So it makes it legal, it makes it okay within marriage. It may not be as important for most people as to legitimize the offspring of those sexual relationships. So if you're married, then you have legitimate, well, according to society. When I use these words, just know that I'm not saying this is real. I'm just saying that socially, we legitimate the offspring of marriages, and then they become eligible for things like inheritance and passing things along. It also creates official kinship relationships, either sanctioned by the state or by society. That you will be married to someone, and then you change. Sometimes people change their names or their social status, and they enter into new kinship relationships, not just with each other, but often with entire families. And so then you start going to each other's houses and eating together and start calling people things like brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Right? So creating these official kinship relationships. And also, perhaps one of the most important functions over time is how it organizes the economic resources. So you bring together two people, put them together, and their labor is added together, and then often that is added on to the labor of the family. And it also organizes how things will be held and passed down from generation to generation. So traditional marriages in many different societies have some of these kinds of functions. It can also be used, well, what's Queen Victoria up to here? Ooh, that's cool, being the grandmother of Europe. So this would be, and obviously this is at the highest levels of society. She doesn't want her kids just be marrying anybody. You don't just get to marry whoever you want. You have to marry these people. Now, probably they weren't all happily married, but they formed these political alliances across these states. And this happens in, obviously, this is a high level example of this, but it happens at lower levels of society as well, where people who might be clans or groups who might be fighting with each other will somehow arrange for a political marriage so that they can come into alliance and do these kinds of things. Now, in the world, there are various kinds of marriage systems. We may have heard the word polygamy. Means being able to be married to more than one person at the same, or one person can be married to multiple people, put it that way. When we usually think of the word polygamy, though, we are actually thinking of a specific type of polygamy, which is technically called polygyny or polygyny, which is when one man is able to marry more than one woman. So poly means several or many, gyne, root word for woman. And so polygyny is actually a marriage form that traditionally has been permitted in the majority of the world societies, part because it is a way in which people have acquired additional labor. It's often in short supply. There are two forms, or traditionally two forms of polygamy. The other form is quite rare. It's known as polyandry, when one woman marries more than one man. Polyandry is an extremely rare form of marriage. It's only found in a couple societies. And even there, it's probably not very often practiced. They look pretty happy, though. This is highland Tibet, an example of, in most cases, in the cases where we see polyandry as an official marriage system, it is usually known as fraternal polyandry. Fraternal polyandry refers to when a woman gets married to one or two or more brothers at the same time. And the reason people in these societies say that they do that is to keep the land and the resources within their family so you don't have to split it up between people. It's an interesting idea. So these are different kinds of marriage systems than the one that we're accustomed to, which is, of course, monogamy. And monogamous marriage, or being married to one person at one time, is actually the most common marriage form in the world. So a majority of societies have permitted polygyny. However, even in those societies that permit polygyny, the majority of marriages are actually a form of monogamy. In part because in order to be able to do polygyny, you actually have to have quite a lot of resources or wealth already. And so, for example, in some Islamic or Muslim societies, polygyny is permitted as long as you can provide a house for each spouse. So most people have a problem just maintaining one house for one spouse. So you could, if you're going to participate in polygyny, you would need to be quite wealthier than the average person. So monogamy is the most common marriage form worldwide, again, even in societies where polygyny is technically permitted. Many societies tolerate what is called informal polygyny or informal polygamy. So here they give you a picture of the funeral of Francis Mitterrand, who was the very famous French prime minister. He's dead there. And on the left, on this side, is his wife. And this is the state funeral. So this is the big deal funeral. And on this side are his daughter and his mistress. So basically, his wife was there and got to wear the scarf. But they tolerated, or they realized, or they permitted that the mistress and his unofficial daughter were able to be in attendance and be close to the funeral proceedings, even close to the official wife. I don't know how much we tolerate informal polygyny in our society. We tend more toward what is sometimes called serial monogamy. We're married to one person for a time, and then we get married to somebody else for a time. Obviously, this is engaged in greater or lesser amounts. Some people believe that we learn serial monogamy in college. You're with one person for a while and then go on to somebody else. It's hard to say. What should we do in our society? Should we be more tolerant of informal polygyny or informal polyandry and stop making people do serial monogamy and get divorced and remarried and divorced and remarried? What do you think? Well, sure, it depends on the person. I'm asking you, should we be more tolerant of different people's choices in our society, or should we keep making them go through these rituals? Who knows? Should we copy the French? Let this happen. Be more nice to each other. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe we should. Maybe we already are. Our textbook also discusses how in many societies there is some marriage payment or some exchange that goes with getting married. What happens?
They like transfer the wealth or goods from one family to another.
The transfer of wealth or goods from one family to another. So this comes in different forms. One of the forms is called Bridewealth, which is when you have to pay the other family in order to acquire a bride. And this usually happens in societies in which the labor of the women is valued. And so the family realizes that they're giving up something valuable by letting the other family have this bride. And so you have to do bride wealth, or you have to pay for that transfer. Another form of this, which is like bride wealth, is called bride service, which the potential husband has to work for the family of the bride a certain amount of time or provide a certain amount of labor in order to get married. There's actually a very famous example from the Bible. I don't know if you all still read the Bible, but it's when Jacob is working 7 years to become married to Rachel. And then his potential father-in-law tricks him into marrying the elder daughter, Leah, on wedding night, and says, you have to marry this. Now you're married. If you really want to marry Rachel, you have to work for me another 7 years. So again, this is the idea that the bride is a valuable thing and you have to work in order to get it. In other societies, the bride is seen as a liability. And so, and this has been true in most European societies and even in the United States up until about a couple hundred years ago, you had to, if you had a daughter, you had to give that daughter what is called a dowry. And the daughter brought that gift with her. And the idea is that the woman wasn't actually going to do anything valuable. And so it was a liability. This other family would have to take care of the woman. And so the woman was supposed to come with something, a dowry, to get established in life. We usually don't do this anymore. However, there is one tradition that we have. If any of you have been married yet, but there's one tradition that we have about that is the remnant of the dowry. I don't know if you know this. Who usually pays for the wedding? The bride's family. That's the remnant of the dowry. The bride's family is traditionally supposed to pay for the whole wedding. So this is the remnant of the tradition that you have to give money to the husband's family in order to get married. So a lot of these things have in some ways gone away, but it's an interesting way in which marriage is an economic exchange. Once you get married, you have to establish new living arrangements. We talked in the last class about societies that might be patrilineal. Not all patrilineal societies are patrilocal, but many of them are. What does that mean, being patrilocal? Yeah, I mean, okay, so maybe Forrest, that's an extreme word. Sometimes the woman might have a say, but let's just say that it is, that there's a patrilineality, and you at least have to leave you're supposed to leave your family home if you're the bride and live with the husband's family. It's actually one of the more common forms of marriage locations, but there are a number of societies that have matrilocal relationships, so that the husband or the man would leave and go stay with the women's side. So it's often associated with also matrilineality, which, as we talked about in the last class, is rarer than patrilineality, but it's not completely absent. There's also, of course, what they call ambilocal, or sometimes it might be, you might switch on and off, or there's not necessarily a clear pattern. And so, as you can see from this map of just one region of the world, there are societies that practice primarily patrilocality. There are societies that are primarily matrilocal, and there are societies that are ambilocal. What are we? Yes, that was a trick question. We are supposed to be technically what we call neolocal. You're supposed to leave both your families and start a new life in a new house. Actually, this is why many people are finding it difficult to get married these days, because of the expectation that you're going to have a house. And houses, if you haven't noticed, are super expensive these days. So it makes it hard to start a new house. And so many people, even in our societies, probably are more either matrilocal or patrilocal than we'd like to admit, because we're dependent upon the mother's side or the father's side or both sides. People who are truly neolocal, who have gone to a new place, it's hard to do, and houses are so expensive. All right, the neolocal. The textbook discusses how people select a spouse and different kinds of ways in which these are done. So technically, one term for this that anthropologists use is the concept of exogamy. So you can tell here this gamous word means marriage, and exo means outside of. So in some ways, when you select a spouse, there's sometimes you want to be outside of your group. You don't want to be too close to your kin or even your town. So when we looked at, for example, the political marriages that Queen Victoria was arranging, they were very exogamous in the sense that they were outside of her own society even. So some people try to make these exogamous alliances, but there is always also this counter tendency, and in some cases it's cultural rules around it, that you want to marry someone that is within a certain group or endogamous to you or within your group. Now, some of this can be a fairly large group, like a religion, for example. Many people want to marry someone who has the same religious beliefs as them. And so you would say that they're religiously endogamous. You would want to be together with somebody like that. But in some cases, socially or kinship wise, people can be pretty endogamous. What do you think about that?
I thought it was pretty crazy.
It does sound a little bit nuts. It's a little too endogamous for us. It's like you don't want to be marrying technically what would be basically a cousin. In many societies, it's seen as something you might want to do or might be important to do is to marry within a certain group. Even in our own society, we sometimes tend to marry closer than we think. As we talked about in the biological anthropology section, humans are very close genetically speaking, so it's not that different to marry anybody in the world. Than we're pretty close to each other, but some people do this pretty closely. So when people get married to each other, they create new kinship ties, and these kinship ties can create new sources of tension. It isn't always that everybody gets along, especially as Kara said, if somebody's been pressured into or forced into a marriage alliance that they didn't necessarily want to do, you can have tension. But there's something that happens in some societies, a specific language for their mother-in-laws. Yeah, this is a source of tension in our own society often as well, that father-in-law, mother-in-law relationship. And so in some societies, they practice what is a whole form of language, which is called avoidance speech, in which you would basically, because this is a tense thing, you would have this form of speaking, which lets you smooth things over. In some societies, this is characterized by what they call a joking relationship. So in order to diffuse the tension, there would be more of joking speech, and some people like to avoid it altogether. So now, in all of this talk about marriage, we probably seem to be missing something that you think about when you're thinking about getting married. Logan, what are we missing here? What seems to be totally absent from any of this stuff? We're talking about Bridewealth and patriarchality and endogamous and all this stuff. What are we missing? Do you want to get a dowry when you get married? You haven't negotiated it out with your future in-laws, how much money is being transferred between you and the inheritance rights? What do we think marriage is supposed to be about? What's missing from all of this? Why are you going to get married? I know most of you are probably thinking maybe you're not, but why would you get married? What about love, man? You drained all the love out of this. What happened to love? Come on. Talking about political alliance and exogamy and bride wealth and forced into patriarchality. What happened to love? No, we believe in love. Now, before I talk about love, I want to say that actually people in almost every society, maybe all over the world, talk or think about love. They might not use exactly the same words and the same terms, but people talk about and enjoy the idea of romantic love. And sometimes in societies, and often, I would say, in societies that practice what we might consider more arranged marriages, they would also think about love as well. And in some societies in which they have a match or a marriage match, they would say that you grow into loving each other, something that you develop over time. You may not do it at first, but you'll love each other over time. Or they permit romantic relationships later on or outside of the official marriage. What these societies have often said is that romantic love is interesting and fun, but using it as the basis for your marriage would be seen to be crazy. It'd be nice, but it's too fickle. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a relationship in which all of a sudden are seeing one of your friends and they're in a relationship and then the other person falls in love with somebody else and the next thing you know, they're gone. I'm like, shit, what happened? I'm like, I fell in love. What? Yeah, it's weird, but we often fall in love and we use it to break up whatever relationship we're in. Bizarre. And so people in other societies recognize that have fickle ideas about romantic love. It comes and goes, and you wouldn't want to base your marriage on that. You'd want to have a more stable basis for marriage. Now, it is also true that around the world, people have, in all different kinds of places and countries, people have started to think about romantic love as the basis for their marriage. So whether you be in China or Korea or India or any of these places where it is typical that you would say that there are more arranged marriages, there are also people who are doing this love thing. Some people have gotten a little bit disillusioned with that, however, and in some societies they seem to want now to have their parents fix them up more because the romantic love stuff doesn't always work out. Turns out that people don't really get along when they fall in love. But in general, people all over the world have this now. So the funny thing about the United States is we say that we are totally free to marry whoever we want to marry. Do what you want. Individual choice. As he said, we had choice. It's up to everybody one. It's up to each individual to do what they want. What's strange, though, is that although we officially have complete freedom and complete choice, we tend to be very socially class endogamous in the United States. That is to say, something like 95% of marriages in the United States will be between people of the same social class. Wealthy people tend to marry each other. Middle class people tend to marry each other. Working class people tend to marry each other. Every so often, say 5%, you'll see people doing a cross-class relationship and getting married and get along. But in general, we tend to marry within our own social class, statistically speaking. Now, how is this possible? How do we have love, complete freedom? Told my kids you can do whatever you want. How does this happen that we have love marriages, yet our social class endogamy is so persistent? How can I tell my kids, love whoever you want, and I don't really have to worry that they're going to love anybody that's too out of my social class? Don't even have to say it. Yeah, one of them is just your zip code. We talked about the high expense of housing. So it's like, if housing is very costly, people basically of the same wealth level are going to live in the same places. So the people you go to school with and interact with in your area are for the most part going to be of the same social class as you. It's actually very rare in this country to have people of different social classes living close to each other. It happens every so often, but not people generally. They go off either in their gated communities or their high class communities or a working class community. It's very rare you see mansions mixed together with working class housing. It just does not happen in this country anymore. We talked about how the billionaires have all gone off in their own little world. But yes, the other place that happens is where you are in college, in the educational system. I think, as you said, that some people expect people to be at the same educational levels when they get married. Is that true? Oh, yeah. So you're trying to marry educationally up. Yeah. In some places, that's very deliberate. In our society, we don't have to be that deliberate, but it just happens. In part because we have an educational system which sorts people out basically by social class. Because things like SAT scores and all those things are actually quite correlated to people's wealth and educational levels. So the people who go to college, you get all these people in a place, get your hormones fired up, get your wealth levels at about the same rate. And that's how I met my wife. We were both in college together. Even though we're from very entirely different zip codes, turned out we could have social class endogamy, even though we'd come from very different parts of the world. Yeah, when this was happening to me, how anything that you have, these dating apps, where you get people from all, I don't know, you don't have to go to the bars anymore. So I'm going to ask you, I don't actually know the answer to this. What do you think? Is the dating app a way to get out of social class endogamy? Are you going to meet new and different people? Or do you end up meeting people that are basically in your same social class because of the dating app. I have no idea. I've never even seen one of these. So maybe they've come and gone for you too, and you don't use these anymore. Does he help me? Yeah. You don't have to say anything about whether you do or not. This can just be what you observe on somebody else's. So yeah, you have to have a date with somebody who's nearby. So if you're going to put your zip code, you just have pretty much the same level of geographic filtering. Anybody else? Anybody seen these things? Or am I just making this up? What do you have to get on the best dating apps? You have to pay. Ooh, wait a second. That's a sorting mechanism. The free people and the people who have money to pay for it. The premium people. Okay. Starting to think these dating apps are reinforcing social class endogamy so far. What else did people, how do you get matched up with people? Algorithmic. Yeah. What are those algorithms looking at? Interests. Yes. The things you like to do, which are probably at least slightly influenced by your social class. The people who like to read books, people who like to shoot things. Hunting has a social class anymore. Maybe in the old days. Interesting.